The offer came on a Saturday morning, which was the kind of detail that later seemed significant even though it wasn't. Owen Briggs was in the driveway of the house on Sycamore Lane with the hood of the Mustang up and his head underneath it when the black pickup with the Cornerstone Auto Salvage logo on the door pulled in without being invited. Two men got out. The one who did the talking was thick through the neck, wearing a polo shirt with the company name embroidered on the chest, and he walked toward Owen's car with the particular confidence of someone who had already decided on the outcome of a conversation before it started. Owen straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. The man looked at the Mustang the way people look at things they want to pay as little as possible for. He said he drove past on Thursday and again this morning, and the car had been sitting in the driveway, and he wondered if Owen was looking to sell. Owen said the car was not sitting. The car was undergoing restoration. The man looked at the car again. He looked at the surface rust on the passenger quarter panel and the cracked rubber around the rear window and the missing driver's side mirror. He looked at it the way a person looks at evidence that supports a conclusion they have already reached. He said he understood, but that some cars were past the point where restoration made financial sense, and that he could offer Owen $800 for it as scrap metal, which was a fair rate given the condition, and that he could have it towed by Tuesday. Owen looked at him. He said $800. The man said he could go to $850 if it helped move the decision. Owen put the rag in his back pocket and looked at the Mustang. It was a 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback in what had once been Highland Green, the exact color, code GN, that had been used on a specific production run of that year. The paint had oxidized unevenly over decades of outdoor storage, and the body showed the accumulated evidence of 56 years of weather and intermittent neglect, but the lines were original and intact, and more importantly, the car was real, not a clone, not a tribute. The door data plate and the VIN prefix and the fender tag, which Owen had decoded the first afternoon he spent with the car, told a story that the surface rust was doing its best to obscure. He said he appreciated the offer, but that the car was not for sale. The man shrugged. He said to keep the card in case Owen changed his mind. He set it on the roof of the Mustang without asking and walked back to the black pickup. Owen watched them leave. He picked up the card from the roof and held it for a moment, and then set it on the workbench inside the garage, where he kept things he did not intend to throw away, but also did not intend to act on. He went back under the hood. He was not angry about it. He had learned early in his career that the salvage perspective was not malicious. It was simply a different way of looking at things, one that assessed value by weight and metal price rather than by history and condition and the specific story a car was capable of telling to someone who knew how to listen. The salvage man had looked at the Mustang and seen what he was trained to see. Owen did not begrudge him the limitation. He had met enough people in this business to understand that the ability to see past the obvious surface of a thing was not given to everyone and was not something that could be taught quickly. What it could be, in his experience, was developed. Over time, with patience and the willingness to be wrong repeatedly in small ways before being right in the way that mattered. He had developed it over 16 years, and he was still developing it. Because the honest truth of this work was that there was always more to know, and the moment you believed otherwise was the moment you started missing things. He went back under the hood. His name was Owen Briggs. He was 41 years old. He had been a restoration specialist for 16 years, working first for a shop in the city and then, for the last 9 years, on his own, out of the two-bay garage behind the house on Sycamore Lane. He was not famous, and he was not rich, and he was not the kind of person who appeared in enthusiast publications or attended high-profile auctions, but he was exceptionally good at what he did in the specific way that competence becomes invisible when it is applied consistently over time without the need for an audience. He had a son named Eli who was 9 years old and who had his father's patience and his mother's eye for detail, which was a combination that manifested in a child who could sit beside Owen in the garage for 2 hours watching him work on something small and delicate without losing focus or requiring entertainment. Eli had been doing this since he was 4. He had his own small rolling stool that lived in the corner of the garage and a pair of safety glasses that were too large for his face and that he wore without complaint because his father had told him that protecting your eyes was not optional in a working space, and Eli had accepted this as a reasonable policy. Owen had been a single father since Eli was 3. He did not dwell on this in the way that some people dwell on the defining circumstances of their lives, turning them over repeatedly and measuring the distance between where they were and where they might have been. He had a son and a garage and work that he found meaningful and a house that needed painting and a Mustang in the driveway that most people in his situation would have taken the 850 for without a second thought. He had bought the car 14 months ago. It had come to him the way the best ones usually came, not through a listing or an auction, but through a conversation, specifically a conversation with a man named Walter Pruitt, who was 73 years old and had been the original owner of the car since 1969, and who had kept it under a canvas cover in the back of a climate-controlled storage unit in the same industrial park for 31 years because he could not bring himself to sell it and could not afford to restore it and could not figure out what else to do with something that had been important once and had not stopped being important simply because time had passed. Walter's daughter had called Owen. She had found his name through a mutual acquaintance, and she had explained that her father was moving to assisted living and that the storage unit needed to be cleared, and that there was a car, and she did not know what to do with it, and her father was having a hard time with the whole situation, and could Owen come take a look? Owen had gone on a Tuesday afternoon. The storage unit was in a climate-controlled row at the back of the industrial park, Unit 114, and Walter had been there when Owen arrived, sitting on a folding chair outside the closed roll-up door with a thermos of coffee and the patient posture of a man who had been thinking about this day for a while. He was thin and deliberate in his movements, with a white beard trimmed close and eyes that were still sharp in the way of people who have spent their lives paying attention to things. He had shaken Owen's hand and said he appreciated him coming. He said he had looked Owen up and read what he could find and that he thought Owen was the right person to see the car, but that he wanted to watch how Owen approached it before he decided anything. Owen had said that was reasonable. Walter had unlocked the door and rolled it up. Inside, under a canvas cover that had been laid on carefully rather than thrown, the shape of the car was unmistakable even in silhouette. Owen had stood in the doorway for a moment. He did not rush forward. He looked at the dimensions and the proportions and the specific way the canvas draped over the roofline and the fastback slope, and he had said, before touching anything, that it looked like a fastback. Walter had said it was. Owen had said what year. Walter had said 68. Owen had walked in then and stood beside the car and put his hand on the canvas and looked at Walter. Walter had nodded once. Owen had pulled the canvas back. He had spent 40 minutes in the storage unit with Walter, who sat on a folding chair and watched Owen work through the car with the careful attention of a man observing something being handled correctly. Owen had opened the doors, pulled the carpet back, found the data plate and decoded it on his phone, located the VIN stamp on the inner fender, checked the engine block casting numbers, and looked very carefully at a specific detail on the torque boxes that confirmed something he had begun to suspect in the first 10 minutes. When he stood up and turned to Walter, he had said it carefully because he was talking to a 73-year-old man who had lived with this car for 50 years and who deserved an honest account of what he actually had. He said that he believed the car was one of approximately 150 to 200 Highland Green fastbacks produced with a specific combination of factory equipment in 1968. He said that the documentation in the glove box, the original window sticker, the invoice copy, and the correspondence Walter had preserved in a manila envelope was the kind of provenance that the serious collector market treated as transformative. He said that he was not a dealer and he was not going to give Walter a number because he did not know enough yet to give a responsible number, but that he wanted Walter to understand that what was under this canvas was not a restoration project. It was a significant historical automobile. Walter had been quiet for a moment. He had asked if Owen wanted to buy it. Owen had said he wanted to ask what Walter wanted to do with it first. Walter had said he wanted it to go somewhere it would be finished. He said he was 73 years old and he had owned the car since he was 17, and that the car deserved to be driven and to be seen and to be what it was supposed to be, and that he did not have the years or the money to do that himself. He said he would rather sell it to someone who understood it than to someone who would make money from it without caring what it was. Owen had said he understood it. Walter had named a price. It was $4,200, which was significantly below any market value. And Owen had looked at him and said he needed Walter to understand what the car might be worth and that he wanted to pay him a fair price, not the price of someone who was taking advantage of an old man who wanted to do the right thing. Walter had said he understood what the car was worth. He had been reading about it for 30 years. He had set his price because he wanted the car to go to someone who would work on it, not to a collector who would put it in a room. He said if Owen was going to stand there and argue about the price, he was going to find someone else. Owen had bought the car for $4,200. He had brought it home on a flatbed on a Thursday evening, and Eli had been sitting on the porch steps when it arrived and had watched the car come off the truck with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered. He had said, "What is that?" Owen had said that was their project. Eli had walked around it once slowly, looking at it from every angle with his hands behind his back, the way Owen did when he was making an assessment. He had said it looked like it needed a lot of work. Owen had said yes. Eli had said okay. He had gone inside and come back with his safety glasses and his rolling stool and positioned himself in the garage and waited. Owen had looked at his son sitting on the stool with the oversized safety glasses on his face and the expression of complete preparedness, and had felt something he did not have a precise word for. Something between gratitude and the particular weight that comes from understanding that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what you are supposed to be doing, with exactly the right person beside you. He had said they were going to start with an assessment. He had said that you never touched a car before you understood what you were touching. Eli had taken out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He said, "Was it okay to write things down?" Owen had said it was more than okay. He said that was the right instinct. Eli had opened the notebook and written the date at the top of the first page and held the pen ready. Owen had smiled, which was not something he did frequently, and they had begun. Over the following weeks, the notebook had filled with Eli's observations, written in the careful print of a 9-year-old who had decided that the information mattered and therefore deserved to be recorded legibly. He noted the colors of different rust formations and what Owen told him they indicated about the metal underneath. He wrote down part numbers and what they corresponded to. He sketched details of the engine compartment with a precision that surprised Owen the first time he looked at the notebook. A rendering of the intake manifold that was technically accurate in its proportions and which Eli had labeled with small neat arrows pointing to each component. Owen had looked at the sketch for a moment. He had said, "Where did you learn to draw like that?" Eli had said he just looked at the thing and tried to put it on the paper the way it actually was. Owen had said that was the correct method. He went back under the hood. The work that followed over the next 14 months was the kind that Owen did best, which was careful, systematic, and oriented entirely toward revealing what the car already was, rather than imposing something on it. He did not rush. He had learned early in his career that the most expensive mistake in restoration was making a decision too quickly and committing to it, and that patience was not a virtue in this work so much as a technical requirement. He documented everything. He photographed each stage before and after. He sourced parts with the precision of someone who understood that the difference between a correct component and an incorrect one was not aesthetic but historical, and that history was what gave this particular car its meaning. Eli was present for most of it. He had learned, over those 14 months, to hand his father the right tool before being asked for it, which was a skill that required attention and pattern recognition and the ability to read a situation without verbal instruction. Owen had not taught him this explicitly. It had developed the way things develop between two people who spend enough time working alongside each other in a quiet space, the language of proximity and shared purpose. On weekends, they worked in the mornings, and Eli asked questions that were sometimes about the car and sometimes not. He had asked once why the driver's side mirror was missing. Owen had said it had been removed at some point, and that finding the correct replacement was not as simple as buying a mirror, because the correct mirror for this specific car was a specific part made for a specific year and trim level, and that putting an incorrect mirror on a car like this would be like putting a word from a different book into a sentence. It would fill the space, but it would not be right, and anyone who knew the language would see it immediately. Eli had said, was it hard to find the right one? Owen had said it had taken him 4 months and 3 states and a conversation with a man in Ohio who had a barn full of new old stock Ford parts from the 60s that he had been accumulating for 40 years and who did not have a website or an email address and who could only be reached by phone on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons between 2 and 4. Eli had said, how did Owen find out about him? Owen had said, through a man in Tennessee who knew a man in Virginia who had bought a part from the Ohio man in 2009 and still had his number. Eli had thought about this. He had said that was a long way to go for a mirror. Owen had said that when you were building something that was supposed to be complete, incomplete was not a category. He said there was the right answer and there was everything else, and everything else might look similar, but it was not the same thing. Eli had looked at the spot where the mirror would go and then written something in his notebook. Owen did not ask what he wrote. On weekends, they worked in the mornings, and Eli asked questions that were sometimes about the car and sometimes not, and Owen answered both kinds with the same care, because he had learned that a child's questions were not always about the subject they appeared to be about, and that the answer mattered more than identifying what was really being asked. Eli had asked once, in the middle of a session where Owen was addressing the surface rust on the passenger quarter panel with the methodical patience the work required, whether the car would be worth a lot of money when it was done. Owen had said possibly, yes. Eli had asked if they would sell it. Owen had been quiet for a moment. He had said he did not know yet. He had said that there were cars you restored to sell and cars you restored to keep and cars you restored because the restoration itself was the point, and that he was not sure yet which category this one was going to fall into. Eli had thought about this. He had said that the man from the salvage place had said it was worthless. Owen had said yes. Eli had said, how did people get so wrong about things? Owen had said that it usually happened when people decided what something was before they looked at it properly. Eli had nodded and handed Owen the next tool without being asked. The completion of the restoration came in early November, 14 months after the flatbed had delivered the car to Sycamore Lane. Owen had not set a deadline and had not rushed the final stages. The car was finished when it was finished, which was a principle he had applied to every project of his career and which occasionally frustrated clients, but which produced results that he could defend without reservation. He drove it for the first time on a Saturday morning with Eli in the passenger seat and the engine doing exactly what it was supposed to do, which was run with the particular authority that a correctly rebuilt 390 cubic inch V8 produces when it has been assembled by someone who understood what each component was for and why it mattered. The car sounded the way it should have sounded in 1968. Eli said nothing for the first 3 blocks. Then he said it sounded different from other cars. Owen said yes. Eli said it sounded like it knew where it was going. Owen looked at his son. He said that was a good way to put it. The documentation that Owen had assembled over the course of the restoration, the original provenance materials from Walter, the photographic record of every stage of the work, the parts verification reports, the correspondence with specialists who had confirmed the car's specific production characteristics, amounted to a file that told the complete and unbroken story of a particular automobile from its factory build sheet to the present day. In the collector market, this kind of documentation was not simply a record. It was the difference between a car that was interesting and a car that was significant. Owen had submitted the documentation to 2 independent authentication specialists 4 weeks before the restoration was complete. He had done this the way he did most things, quietly and without announcing it, because he needed to know what he actually had before he made any decisions about what to do with it. The responses came back within 10 days of each other. Both were thorough. Both were consistent. Both arrived at conclusions that were in alignment with what Owen had suspected since the afternoon in Walter's storage unit, but had not allowed himself to state as a certainty until someone who was not him had examined the evidence and reached the same place independently. The car was one of a documented subset of 1968 Highland Green Mustang fastbacks with verified factory GT equipment, matching numbers, drivetrain, and complete original documentation. In the current collector market, the authentication reports place the conservative value estimate at between $7.8 and $8.4 million. Owen read both reports at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening after Eli was asleep. He read them twice. He made a few notes in the margin. He got up and made a cup of coffee and came back and read them a third time. Then he went to the garage and stood beside the car for a while with his coffee. He thought about Walter Pruitt, who was 73 years old and living in assisted living, and who had known what the car was worth and had sold it to Owen for $4,200 because he wanted it to go to someone who would finish it. He thought about that for a long time. He went back inside and wrote down a number on a piece of paper and put the piece of paper next to the authentication reports. The number was $4,200. Next to it he wrote what Walter asked. Then he wrote a second number, then a third. He sat with those numbers and what they meant and made a decision that he had probably already made the moment Walter told him his price. He called Walter's daughter in the morning. He had sat with his coffee for a while before dialing, not because he was uncertain about what he was going to say, but because he wanted to say it correctly. He had thought about how Walter had sat on the folding chair outside Unit 114 and watched him approach the car and had made a decision based on what he observed. He had thought about the $4,200 and the manila envelope of original documents and the way Walter had said he would find someone else if Owen was going to stand there and argue about the price. He had thought about what it meant that a man could spend 50 years with something and understand it well enough to know not only what it was worth, but what it deserved. He dialed. He told her what the authentication report said. He told her the full value range. He told her that he intended to sell the car at auction and that when it sold, he was going to give Walter 50% of the proceeds because Walter had owned the car for 50 years and had preserved it and had trusted Owen with it and had sold it at a price that reflected his character rather than the market, and that character deserved to be met in kind. There was a silence on the phone. Walter's daughter said she needed a moment. He said he understood. She said her father was going to cry. Owen said that was all right. She asked why he was doing this. He said because $4,200 was not the right price for what Walter had given him, and that the difference between what something was worth and what someone asked for, it was not a gap you were supposed to keep. The auction took place 6 weeks later at a regional house that specialized in significant collector automobiles. The car sold in 11 minutes of bidding for $8.1 million, which fell in the middle of the authentication range and which produced, in the moment the gavel came down, a particular silence in the room of the kind that follows when a number that most people present have been thinking about is confirmed rather than exceeded or missed. Owen stood at the back of the room. The auction house was not the largest in the region, but it had a reputation for running clean sales with serious buyers, and the room that afternoon held perhaps 60 people, collectors, dealers, a few journalists with press credentials, and the particular attentiveness of people who understood they were watching something that would be cited in future conversations about this car. The Mustang was the final lot of the session, which meant that everyone in the room had stayed for it. Owen had arranged for Walter Pruitt to watch by video call on a tablet that Walter's daughter held for him in the common room of the assisted living facility. Walter had dressed for the occasion. This was something his daughter had mentioned to Owen the night before, that her father had put on his good shirt and sat in the chair by the window to wait. Owen had said he was glad. He had said to tell Walter that the car looked like it was supposed to look. Walter's daughter had said she would tell him. Owen had said to tell him thank you. Eli stood beside him. Eli had been told the number the night before at the kitchen table in the same way that Owen told him everything important, directly and without softening, with enough context to understand what it meant and why. Eli had listened and then asked if they were going to keep the car. Owen had said no. He had said the car needed to go where it would be seen by people who understood what it was, and that keeping it in the garage on Sycamore Lane would be the wrong answer for the car, even if it was the easier answer for them. Eli had thought about this. He had said that was the same thing Walter said about selling it to Owen. Owen had looked at his son. He had said yes. He had said that was exactly right. At the auction, when the gavel came down, Eli looked up at Owen. He said, "Is that the number?" Owen said yes. Eli said, "What happens now?" Owen said they were going to call Walter's daughter. He said after that they were going to go home and have dinner, and tomorrow morning Owen was going to open the shop and start on the next car. Eli said, "What was the next car?" Owen said he didn't know yet. He said that was the part he always liked best, the not knowing yet, because it meant something was about to arrive and he got to find out what it was. Eli considered this. He looked back at the front of the auction room where the Mustang sat under the lights, Highland green and complete and exactly what it had always been underneath everything that time and weather had put on top of it. He said it looked different in here than it did in the garage. Owen said, "How so?" Eli said in the garage it looked like theirs. Here it looked like everyone's. Owen looked at his son for a moment. He said that was the whole point of finishing it. On the drive home, Eli fell asleep in the passenger seat before they reached the highway. Owen drove in the particular quiet that follows a large thing being completed and processed and handed off to what comes next. The night was clear. The road was familiar. His hands were on the wheel of his work truck, which had 108,000 miles on it and a heater that worked on the driver's side and not the passenger's side, a situation he had not yet addressed because there were always more pressing things, and also because Eli had taken to wearing his coat in the car during winter with the resigned adaptation of someone who has decided that imperfect conditions are simply part of the texture of being alive. Owen thought about the salvage man and the $850 and the card that was still on the workbench in the garage. He thought about Walter in the storage unit on a folding chair watching Owen move through a car that he had kept for 50 years because he could not figure out what else to do with something that had been important. He thought about Eli's hands passing him tools in the correct order without being asked, and about a rolling stool in the corner of the garage with a pair of oversized safety glasses on the seat, and about the specific quality of attention a 9-year-old brings to a quiet space when the person beside him has shown him that quiet spaces are where the important work happens. He thought that the car had come to him through trust and was leaving through trust, and that the distance between those 2 points was 14 months and $8.1 million, and a rolling stool and a specific sound that Eli had described correctly without being taught the vocabulary for it. He merged onto the highway. Eli slept. The road ran out ahead of them into the dark in the direct and reliable way of roads that have been driven so many times they feel less like directions than like memory. And Owen followed it home the way he always went home, with full attention and both hands on the wheel and the particular contentment of a man who had done exactly what the work required and nothing less.